March 15, 2019, when SEAL Commander Vincent Dalton's heart flatlined in the Afghan desert. His entire team froze, except for one silent female medic who had never spoken a single word to anyone on base. What she did in those 3 minutes didn't just save his life. It shattered every assumption these hardened warriors had about strength and left grown men weeping. But why had she remained silent all this time? And what was she hiding that only a dying man could reveal? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The dust hadn't settled from the explosion when Staff Sergeant Emma Reeves felt it, that split-second shift in the air that separates routine chaos from catastrophe. Her hands moved automatically, checking her medical pack while the rest of SEAL Team 7 scrambled for cover behind a crumbling mud wall. Nobody noticed her. They never did. For 11 months, Emma had been the ghost of Forward Operating Base Atlas. She arrived, did her job with mechanical precision, and disappeared into her quarters without uttering a single word. The SEALs had given up trying to talk to her after the first week. Some thought she was mute. Others whispered she'd seen something so horrific downrange that her voice had simply stopped. The truth was simpler and far more complicated. But Emma had learned long ago that silence was safer than explanation. Medic. MEDIC. The scream cut through the ringing in her ears. Emma's boots hit the sand before her conscious mind registered the movement. 30 yards ahead, through the haze of smoke and pulverized earth, she spotted the source, Commander Vincent. Dalton lay motionless in the center of the kill zone, the team's leader 6'3" of legendary SEAL reputation, looked small against the vastness of the Afghan desert. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, was already sprinting toward him, but Emma's tactical brain calculated angles and distances in milliseconds. The shot trajectory, the likely sniper position, the fatal funnel Marcus was charging straight into. Her hand shot out, catching Marcus by his plate carrier and yanking him backward with surprising force for someone who barely cleared 5'6". His eyes went wide with shock and anger, but before he could speak, a bullet cracked past exactly where his head had been 2 seconds earlier. Emma didn't wait for thanks. She was already moving, but not toward Dalton. Instead, she sprinted at an angle, using the terrain's natural defilade and the burning wreckage of their vehicle for cover. The rest of the team provided suppressing fire, but they were shooting at shadows. The sniper was a professional. She reached Dalton in 45 seconds, an eternity in combat medicine. His face had that waxy, gray quality that meant the body was already shutting down non-essential systems. Emma's fingers found his carotid artery. Nothing. No pulse. No respiration. The blast had thrown him 15 feet into a concrete fragment, and from the unnatural angle of his torso, she suspected internal hemorrhaging. But it was his heart that concerned her most. The cardiac monitor on his vest showed a flatline. Commander Vincent Dalton, the man who'd led more successful operations than any other SEAL in the company. The warrior who'd pulled 3 teammates from a burning helo in Helmand Province. The leader who'd never lost a single operator under his command, was clinically dead. Emma's hands moved without hesitation. She ripped open his vest, exposing his chest. Around her, bullets pinged off rocks and hissed through the air, but she'd learned to compartmentalize fear so thoroughly it might as well not exist. Her world narrowed to the man dying beneath her hands. Chest compressions. Hard and fast. The textbook said 100 to 120 per minute, but Emma knew in the field you pushed harder. Ribs could heal. Death COULDN, single quotes T.30 compressions. She tilted his head back, checking his airway. Clear. 2 rescue breaths. His chest rose and fell, but it was her air, not his. 30 more compressions. Her shoulders burned. Sweat dripped into her eyes, mixing with the dust that coated everything in this godforsaken country. Emma! Marcus had made it to her position, sliding in beside her with the team's advanced medical kit. He was the only one who still used her name. "What do you need?" She didn't answer, couldn't answer, but her eyes flicked to the kit, then to Dalton's chest. Marcus understood. He'd worked with her long enough to read her minimal gestures. The AED pads went on. The device was analyzed. "Shock advised," the mechanical voice announced with inappropriate calm. "Clear." Marcus shouted, and Emma lifted her hands. Dalton's body convulsed. The monitor showed a blip, then flatlined again. Emma resumed compressions immediately. 1 minute gone. Brain damage began at 4 minutes without oxygen. She had 3 minutes to bring him back, or the man beneath her hands would become a name on a memorial wall. But something was different now. As her hands pushed rhythmically against his sternum, Emma felt a tremor in her chest, not physical, but emotional. A crack in the armor. She'd welded around herself for the past 3 years. She'd been silent for so long because words had failed her when she needed them most. Because the last time she'd spoken in a moment like this, her pleas had been ignored and someone she loved had died. Because she'd learned that action spoke louder, and silence protected her from the pain of not being heard. But Dalton was different. In 11 months, he'd never pressured her to speak, never treated her silence as a deficiency. He'd simply trusted her skills and made sure his team did the same. When other operators complained about having a broken medic, he'd shut them down with a look that could melt steel. "You keep fighting," Emma thought, pushing harder against his chest. "You don't get to die on me, Commander." 2 minutes. The AED analyzed again. Another shock was delivered. Another flatline. Marcus was calling for the medevac, but they both knew the hello was 12 minutes out. Dalton didn't have 12 minutes. He barely had one. Emma's arms screamed with exhaustion, but she didn't slow. She couldn't. Because in this moment, she realized something that terrified her more than any enemy fire. She cared. Despite every wall she'd built, despite the protective silence she'd wrapped around herself, she cared desperately whether this man lived or died, and that caring was going to force her to do something she swore she'd never do again. It was going to make her speak. 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Since his heart stopped. 15 seconds until permanent brain damage became likely. Emma's hands never stopped their rhythm, but her lips moved, forming words she hadn't spoken aloud in 3 years. What came out would change everything, not just for Dalton, but for every hardened warrior watching this moment unfold. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do isn't staying strong in silence. Sometimes it's finding the courage to break it. The words came out as a whisper at first, barely audible over the chaos of gunfire and shouting. "Stay with me." Marcus's head snapped toward her so fast she heard his neck crack. In 11 months, he'd never heard her voice. None of them had. But there wasn't time to process the shot because Emma was already doing something that defied every protocol she'd ever learned. She stopped compressions. "Emma." "What are you?" Marcus started, but she held up one hand. Her eyes locked on Dalton's face with an intensity that silenced him. Her other hand pressed flat against the commander's chest, right over his heart. Not pumping, just resting there, fingers spread wide. To anyone watching, it looked like she'd given up. Like she was saying goodbye. Lieutenant Jake Morrison had just reached their position, sliding behind the wreckage with covering fire still pinging overhead. He saw Emma's hand, saw the flatline on the monitor, and felt his stomach drop. They were losing Dalton, and their medic had apparently lost her mind. "Doc, you need to keep going," Morrison shouted. "Don't stop compressions." But Emma wasn't listening. Her lips moved again, and this time the words were clearer, though still quiet enough that only Marcus and Morrison could hear them. "I know you're scared. I know it's easier to let go." Her voice cracked on the last word, raw with an emotion that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient. "But you have to fight. Not for the mission. Not for the team. For yourself." Marcus felt chills run down his spine, despite the 110-degree heat. Emma's eyes were closed now, her hand still pressed against Dalton's chest. And she was speaking with the kind of desperate conviction that suggested she'd said these exact words before to someone else who hadn't come back. "You told me once that every operator has a reason. They keep going," Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. "You said yours was unfinished. You said you'd know when it was time to stop fighting, and that time wasn't in some dusty hellhole halfway around the world." Morrison exchanged glances with Marcus. When had Dalton said that to her? They'd assumed the commander and the silent medic had zero relationship beyond professional necessity. 3 minutes and 20 seconds since Dalton's heart stopped. Emma's hand suddenly pressed harder, and her voice rose to something just below a shout. "So prove it. Prove you meant what you said. Prove that you're not a liar, Vincent Dalton." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And then she did something that would be dissected in after-action reports and medical journals for years to come. Something that had no basis in any manual or protocol. Something that was pure instinct and desperation, and maybe a little bit of whatever kept broken people believing in impossible things. She placed both hands over his heart and delivered a single, controlled strike with the base of her palm. Not a compression. A precordial thump, a technique so controversial and rarely successful that most medics never attempted it outside of very specific circumstances. The force had to be exact. Too soft and it did nothing. Too hard and you could cause more damage. Emma hit him with the precision of someone who'd spent 3 years replaying a single moment over and over. Wondering if she'd done it differently, would the outcome have changed? The monitor stayed flat. For 2 seconds that felt like 2 hours. Nothing happened. Then Dalton's body jerked, not from external stimulus, but from something internal. The monitor showed a single blip. Then another. Irregular, weak, but unmistakably a rhythm. "I've got a pulse." Marcus's hands were on Dalton's neck, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Weak and thready, but it's there." Emma immediately resumed chest compressions, but lighter now, supporting the heart's attempt to restart rather than doing all the work. Her face showed no triumph, no relief, just fierce concentration. Dalton's chest rose on its own. A shallow breath, then another. His eyes remained closed, but his lips moved slightly, and a sound emerged. Not words, just a groan of someone being dragged back from the edge against their will. "That's it," Emma said, her voice returning to that gentle whisper. "Keep breathing. Keep fighting." The medevac chopper's rotors became audible in the distance, growing louder. Morrison was already popping. Smoke to mark their LZ. The sniper had either been eliminated or decided discretion was the better part of valor. Because the incoming fire had stopped, but Emma wasn't thinking about extraction or enemy forces. She was thinking about the last time she'd spoken to someone whose heart had stopped. The last time she'd begged someone to keep fighting. 3 years ago, in a small clinic outside Mosul, a 9-year-old girl named Amira, caught in crossfire during what was supposed to be a routine patrol. Emma had been with an Army medical unit then, not yet transferred to special operations. She'd done everything right, every protocol, every technique, every desperate measure. But it hadn't been enough. The girl's father had begged Emma to save her, to do something, anything. And Emma had tried. God, how she'd tried. She'd spoken to that little girl, told her about all the things she'd get to do when she recovered, about the life waiting for her. But Amira's heart never restarted. And when Emma had looked up to tell the father his daughter was gone, She'd seen in his eyes what her words had cost him. Hope given and then destroyed was worse than no hope at all. He'd said something in Arabic she didn't understand, but the translator later told her it meant, "Your promises are poison." Emma stopped speaking that day. She'd promised herself she'd never again give someone false hope with words that might be lies. She'd let her actions speak, and if they weren't enough, at least she wouldn't compound the tragedy with broken promises. But today, watching Dalton's chest rise and fall with increasing strength, she realized she'd been wrong about something fundamental. Words weren't the problem. Fear was. She'd been silent not because words were powerless, but because she was terrified of caring enough to use them. Dalton's eyes cracked open, unfocused and confused. His lips moved again, and this time, actual words came out, barely a whisper. Heard you. Emma's hand found his, squeezed once. Save your strength, Commander. No, he rasped, his fingers tightening around hers with surprising force. Heard. You talking. To Morrison. Last month. Emma's breath caught. Last month, she'd been sorting medical supplies in the aid station when she thought she was alone. Marcus had walked in unexpectedly, and she'd been so startled she'd actually gasped a small sound. But the first vocalization anyone had heard from her in months. Marcus had frozen, then quietly backed out without acknowledging it. But apparently, Dalton had been in the next room. He'd heard. Knew you. Could speak, Dalton continued, each word clearly causing him pain. Didn't know. Why you chose. Not to. Still don't. The medevac was landing now, kicking up sand and forcing everyone to shield their eyes. The medics jumped out with a stretcher, and Emma began the handoff, giving them vitals and treatment information in clear, concise medical terminology. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, but professional. Clinical. The medevac medic stared at her like she'd grown a second head. The legendary silent medic of FOB Atlas, not only speaking but delivering a textbook handoff report. As they loaded Dalton onto the stretcher, his hand shot out, grabbing Emma's wrist. His eyes were clearer now, focusing on her with an intensity that made her want to look away. Thank you, he said. For breaking your silence. For me. Emma felt something crack further inside her chest, but she kept her voice steady. Don't make me regret it by dying on that helicopter, Commander. The ghost of a smile touched his pale lips. Yes, ma'am. They lifted him into the bird, and Marcus moved to follow senior personnel, always accompanied critical casualties. Dalton's hand came up in a weak stop gesture. Webb stays, he managed. Watch. Her. And then the helicopter lifted off, taking Vincent Dalton away from the battlefield where he'd been dead for 3.5 minutes, and somehow come back. Emma stood in the rotor wash, watching the chopper become a speck against the brutal blue sky. Around her, the team was securing the perimeter, calling in the all clear, beginning the mechanical process of moving to their extraction point. But Morrison hadn't moved. Neither had Marcus. They were both staring at her with expressions she couldn't quite interpret. Not quite shock. Not quite suspicion. Something closer to wonder. How long have you been able to speak? Morrison finally asked. Emma turned to face them, and for a moment, she almost retreated back into silence. It would be easier, safer, but she'd made a choice when she spoke to Dalton. There was no going back from that. Always, she said simply. I just chose not to. Why? Marcus's voice was gentle. The way you'd speak to someone standing on a ledge. Emma looked at the blood on her hands, Dalton's blood, and then at the desert horizon where the medevac had disappeared. Because 3 years ago, I made a promise I couldn't keep, she said. And I decided that silence was better than lying. She started walking toward the rally point, leaving the 2 operators standing in her wake. But Morrison called after her. What changed? Why speak now? Emma stopped but didn't turn around. When she answered, her voice carried clearly across the distance between them. because I realized that staying silent was its own kind of lie. And Vincent Dalton deserved better than that. Then she kept walking, leaving them with more questions than answers and the impossible knowledge that the woman who'd just brought their commander back from death was far more complex than any of them had imagined. Real question now wasn't why Emma had been silent. It was what speaking again would cost her. The extraction back to FOB Atlas took 40 minutes by ground convoy, and Emma spent every second of it staring at the desert rolling past the armored window. Nobody tried to talk to her. The team moved through their post-mission routine with mechanical efficiency, but she could feel their glances, hear the whispered conversations that stopped when she looked up. She'd become interesting. And that was dangerous. By the time they rolled through the base gates, the story had already spread. The silent medic had spoken. Commander Dalton had been dead and wasn't anymore. Details were sparse and getting more fantastical with each retelling. By the time they reached the TOC for debrief, Emma had apparently performed open-heart surgery with a pocket knife and sheer force of will. Major Sarah Chun, the base medical officer and Emma's direct superior, was waiting at the aid station. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable behind her wireframe glasses. "My office, now." Emma followed her inside, and Chun shut the door with more force than necessary. For a long moment, the major just stared at her, and Emma prepared herself for the interrogation she knew was coming. 347 days, Chun finally said. "That's how long you've been on my base without speaking a single word. I've written it off as selective mutism, filed it as a medical notation, protected you from getting reassigned to some desk job stateside." Emma remained silent. Old habits dying hard. "And now I get a call from Bagram telling me my mute medic just talked Commander Dalton back from clinical death." Chun leaned against her desk. "So either you've just experienced a miraculous recovery from a psychological condition, or you've been lying to me for almost a year. Which is it?" "I never claimed to be mute," Emma said quietly. "I just didn't speak. That's semantics, Reeves, and you know it." Chun's voice rose slightly. "I had you evaluated by 3 different psychologists. Do you know how many reports I filed justifying keeping you in the theater despite concerns about your mental fitness? I never asked you to do that. No, you just let me do it anyway." Chun rubbed her temples. "The thing is, I don't even think you're manipulative. I think you genuinely believed you were protecting yourself by staying silent. But Emma, you're one of the best combat medics I've ever seen. Your instincts are extraordinary, your technical skills are flawless, and your composure under fire is something I wish I could bottle and give to every medic in the Army." Emma felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. Praise had become foreign to her, but this? Chun continued. "Speaking to save Dalton but not speaking to protect yourself. That tells me you don't value your own well-being nearly as much as you value everyone else's. And that concerns me more than the silence ever did." Before Emma could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Marcus Webb stuck his head in without waiting for permission. "Major Chun, sorry to interrupt, but there's a call from Landstuhl Medical Center. They're asking for Staff Sergeant Reeves specifically." Emma's heart rate spiked. Landstuhl was where they'd flown Dalton. If they were calling for her directly. Chun must have seen something in her expression because her voice softened. "Take it in the communications room. We'll finish this conversation later." Emma moved through the base on autopilot, aware of every set of eyes that followed her. The communications specialist handed her a sat phone with a knowing look that suggested the entire base had heard about the miracle in the desert by now. "This is Staff Sergeant Reeves." "Sergeant, this is Captain Rodriguez, cardiothorac surgeon at Landstuhl Regional." The voice was crisp, professional. "I'm calling about Commander Dalton." Emma's grip tightened on the phone. He's stable?" "Better than stable, actually." It's remarkable. There was a pause, and Emma could hear papers shuffling. I need to understand exactly what you did out there. His medical report shows he was in cardiac arrest for 3.5 minutes, which should have resulted in significant neurological damage. But his brain function is completely normal. More than normal, he's sharp as a tack and already arguing with me about when he can return to duty. Relief flooded through Emma so intensely she had to sit down. The precordial thump, she said. I know it's not standard protocol, but the thump didn't save him, Rodriguez interrupted. I mean, it helped restart the rhythm, sure. But Sergeant, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen hundreds of cardiac arrest cases. What you did out there, the timing, the technique, the way you somehow maintained adequate perfusion with compressions alone for over 3 minutes, that's not luck. That's not even a skill. That's something else entirely. Emma didn't know what to say to that. He wants to talk to you, Rodriguez continued. Dalton, he's been asking for you since he woke up. I told him I needed to call you first for the medical debrief, but... Another pause. He's insistent. Would you like me to transfer you? Every instinct told Emma to decline. To maintain distance. To return to the safe isolation she'd built around herself. Yes, she heard herself say. There was a click, some muffled conversation. And then a voice she'd heard in her nightmares for the past 3 hours. Reeves. Dalton sounded tired, but alert. His voice lacking the death rattle rasped from the battlefield. Emma felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Commander. I'm glad you're... She stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. Alive? He was supplied with dark humor. Yeah, me too. Thanks to you. Just doing my job, sir. Bullshit. The word came out harsh, but not angry. Your job is to provide emergency medical care. Your job isn't to speak to someone for the first time in 3 years because you think it might help them fight harder. Emma closed her eyes. Of course he remembered. He'd been technically dead, but somehow he'd heard everything. Marcus filled me in on some details, Dalton continued. About Mosul, about the girl. He had no right. Emma started, anger flaring. He was worried about you. They all are. Dalton's voice softened. Emma, I need you to understand something. What happened to that child wasn't your fault. You did everything right, and sometimes everything right still isn't enough. That's the job. That's the weight we carry. I know that. Her voice came out sharper than intended. Do you? Because from where I'm lying in a hospital bed, I shouldn't be lucid enough to complain. About it seems like you've been punishing yourself for 3 years for a failure that was never yours to own. Emma felt something hot behind her eyes. She hadn't cried in 3 years either. Silence and tearlessness had gone hand in hand, 2 walls of the same prison. You spoke to me, Dalton said, his voice gentler now. You broke your silence because you thought it might make a difference. And maybe it did. Maybe hearing your voice gave me something to fight toward. Or maybe it was just excellent medical care and dumb luck. Either way, you took a risk. You made yourself vulnerable. And I'm asking you not to regret that. I don't regret it, Emma said, surprised to find it was true. Good, because I need you to do something for me. What? Keep talking. Not just to me, but to the team. To Chun. To whoever you need to talk to. Because Emma, you saved my life today, but I think maybe I can return the favor. The silence isn't protecting you anymore. It's killing you slowly. And I'll be damned if I survived clinical death, just to watch you die by inches. Emma opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. The irony wasn't lost on her. Think about it, Dalton said. I'll be back at Atlas in 2 weeks. The docs say I'm healing faster than I should be, something about having excellent cardiovascular conditioning and a medic who apparently made a deal with God himself to bring me back. Despite everything, Emma felt her lips twitch. I'm not religious, Commander. Then maybe you're just that good at your job. She could hear the smile in his voice. Get some rest, Reeves. That's an order. And when I get back, we're having a real conversation. One where you don't wait until I'm clinically dead to participate. Yes, sir. The line went dead, and Emma sat in the communications room for a long moment, the phone still pressed to her ear. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of base life generators humming. Personnel moving between buildings. The distant thump of helicopters. Everything was exactly as it had been this morning. Everything was completely different. When she finally emerged from the communications room, Marcus was waiting outside. He straightened when he saw her, his expression uncertain. He's fine, Emma said. Apparently arguing with his doctors already. Marcus's relief was visible. Then his expression shifted to something more guarded. Look, about what I told him. About Mosul, I know I overstepped, but it's fine. Emma surprised herself with how much she meant it. He's right. I've been carrying something that wasn't mine to carry. They walked in silence for a moment, heading back toward the aid station. The sun was setting, painting the Afghan sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for a place so defined by violence. For what it's worth, Marcus said finally. The team is glad you spoke. Not because we think there was anything wrong with your silence, but because ... I don't know. It feels like we're finally meeting the real you. And she's pretty impressive. Emma didn't know how to respond to that. So she just nodded. But as they reached the aid station, she found herself saying something she hadn't planned. His name was Daniel. Marcus stopped walking. What? The translator. In Mosul, the one who told me what Amira's father said. Emma stared at the aid station door but didn't move to open it. He died 3 weeks later in a mortar attack. I never got to tell him that those words, your promises are poison, they changed my entire life. I don't know if he'd think that was good or bad. Emma, I just thought someone should know his name. Since we're talking about the weight we carry. She finally looked at Marcus. Daniel Ortiz, from San Antonio. He was 23 years old, and he wanted to be a teacher when he got home. Marcus's throat worked, and he nodded slowly. I'll remember it. Thank you. Emma pushed open the aid station door, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like she was walking alone. The hardest part wasn't speaking. Again, it was allowing herself to be heard. The next 72 hours proved that speaking again was far more complicated than Emma had anticipated. Word spread through FOB, Atlas like wildfire. And suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to her. Operators who'd barely acknowledged her existence now stopped her in the chow hall to ask questions. Support personnel who'd developed elaborate hand signal systems to communicate with her seemed almost offended that she could speak and had chosen not to. Emma found herself explaining the same thing over and over. I wasn't mute. I just didn't speak. The distinction seemed to matter to people, though she wasn't entirely sure why. What bothered her most wasn't the attention, though that was exhausting enough. It was the realization that she'd forgotten how to engage in normal human conversation. 3 years of silence had atrophied social muscles she didn't even know she'd been using. On the second day, a young Marine corporal named Tyler Brooks approached her in the aid station. He couldn't have been more than 20. With nervous hands and a bleeding gash across his forearm from a mishap with concertina wire. Heard you're the one who brought Commander Dalton back, he said as Emma cleaned the wound. That's pretty badass. Emma focused on her work, not sure how to respond to that. I mean, everyone's talking about it, Brooks continued, seemingly unbothered by her silence. They're saying you spoke for the first time in years. That you, called him back from the dead or something. It wasn't that dramatic, Emma finally said, her voice still rough from disuse. I performed CPR and used an AED, standard emergency medicine. But you did talk to him, right? While you were bringing him back? Emma's hands paused for just a moment. Yes, what did you say? The question was innocent, curious rather than invasive, but it hit Emma like a punch. What had she said? She remembered the emotions, the desperation, the fear, the need to reach him somehow, but the actual words were fragmentary, lost in the adrenaline haze. I told him to fight, she said simply. Resuming her stitching. Brooks nodded like this was profound wisdom. My dad had a heart attack last year. Back in Ohio. My mom said the paramedics were amazing, but he doesn't remember any of it. Sometimes I wonder if it would have helped if someone he knew had been there, you know. Talking to him. Emma tied off the last stitch with practiced efficiency. Your father survived? Yeah, triple bypass, but he's good now. Coaching Little League again and everything. Brooks smiled. Mom says he's too stubborn to die. Stubbornness is an underrated survival trait, Emma said, and was surprised when Brooks laughed. I'll remember that for my performance review. He flexed his newly bandaged arm experimentally. Thanks, Doc, and hey, for what it's worth. I'm glad you're talking again. You've got a nice voice. After he left, Emma sat in the empty aid station and realized something unsettling. That brief, normal conversation had felt good. Frighteningly good. Like a part of her that had been amputated was suddenly, impossibly growing back. That evening, Major Chun found her doing inventory, a task that didn't technically need doing but gave Emma's hands something to occupy themselves with. We need to talk about your psychological evaluation, Chun said without preamble. Emma had been expecting this. Unfit for duty, ma'am. That's not for you to determine. Chun pulled up a chair, her expression somewhere between concerned and frustrated. Look, I'm not trying to punish you, but you've had a significant psychological event. You've broken 3 years of elective silence under extreme stress. That requires evaluation. With respect, Major, I spoke because it was necessary. That doesn't indicate psychological instability. No, but choosing 3 years of silence in the first place might. Chun's voice softened. Emma, I'm not the enemy here. I'm trying to help you. But I need you to work with me. Emma set down the box of gauze she'd been counting. What do you want me to say? The truth. Why did you stop speaking? Why did you start it again? What you need to process what happened in Mosul. Chun leaned forward. I've read your file. Before the incident with the Iraqi girl, you were on track for promotion. Commendations from every unit you'd served with. Glowing reviews. Then Amira died, and you went silent, and everything just stopped. I didn't stop being good at my job. No, you became exceptional at your job. Almost obsessively so. Chun pulled out a tablet, scrolling through data. Your medical outcomes are 30% better than the average combat medic. Your response times are faster. Your diagnostic accuracy is nearly perfect. It's like you channeled everything, every emotion, every word, every connection into being the best medic possible. Emma felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical vulnerability. Is that a problem? It is when it's the only thing keeping you functioning. Chun set the tablet aside. Emma, you're not a machine. You're a human being who experienced trauma and found a coping mechanism. But coping isn't the same as healing. And now that mechanism is gone. So I need to make sure you have other support structures in place before you completely fall apart. I'm not going to fall apart. Everyone falls apart eventually. The question is whether you do it in a controlled environment with support, or alone in the dark where no one can help you. The words hit harder than Emma wanted to admit. She thought about the nights after Mosul, lying in her bunk and feeling like her entire chest was filled with broken glass. How silence had been the only thing that kept the pieces from cutting deeper. I'll do the evaluation, Emma said finally. But I'm not leaving my team. Commander Dalton will need medical support when he returns, and and you feel responsible for him now. Chun's expression was knowing. Emma, that's exactly what I'm worried about. You can't make Dalton your redemption. He's not a replacement for Amira. I know that, do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to rewrite history. Save the commander, prove you weren't powerless in Mosul. Absolve yourself of guilt you never should have carried in the first place. Emma stood abruptly. Permission to be dismissed, Major. Chun sighed but nodded. Evaluation is tomorrow at 0900. Don't make me send MPs to collect you. Emma left before she could say something insubordinate. She found herself walking the perimeter of the base, a habit she'd developed during the silent years when sleep eluded her. The guard towers were manned, but the soldiers there knew her by sight and didn't bother with challenges. The silent medic taking her midnight walk. Except now she wasn't silent anymore, and somehow that made everything more complicated. Thought I might find you out here. Emma turned to find Lieutenant Morrison falling into step beside her. His hands were shoved in his pockets, his usually sharp expression softened by something that looked like genuine concern. Word travels fast on a small base, Emma said. Chun's worried about you. So's Marcus. Hell, half the team is placing bets on whether you'll bolt. I don't run from my problems. No. You just stopped talking about them for 3 years. Morrison's voice wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. Look, I'm not trying to armchair therapist you, but I've been doing this job long enough to recognize someone who's hanging on by their fingernails. Emma stopped walking. Is there a point to this conversation, Lieutenant? Yeah, the point is that you saved Dalton's life, and that was incredible. But you don't have to save everyone else to prove you deserve to be here. You already deserve to be here. You always did. Something in Emma's chest cracked a little further. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. Morrison turned to face her fully. Because right now, all I see is someone punishing themselves for a tragedy they couldn't prevent. And I've seen where that road leads, Emma. It doesn't end well. For a long moment, Emma considered maintaining the walls, deflecting, returning to the safe. Isolation of keeping everything locked inside. But she'd already broken the silence. What was one more barrier? Her name was Amira Hassan, Emma said quietly. She was 9 years old. She liked purple flowers and had a stuffed rabbit her grandmother made for her. She wanted to be a doctor. The words came faster now, like a dam breaking. She got hit by crossfire during a patrol. Wrong place, wrong time. And I did everything right, everything, but she died anyway. And her father looked at me like I'd killed her myself. Morrison didn't interrupt, just listened with the kind of focused attention that suggested he understood the weight of what she was saying. I couldn't save her, Emma continued. But I thought maybe if I stopped making promises, stopped giving people false hope with words that meant nothing, at least I wouldn't make it worse. At least I wouldn't be lying. But you were lying, Morrison said gently. Just to yourself instead of everyone else. You were telling yourself that staying silent made you safer, less vulnerable. That if you didn't speak, you couldn't fail again. Emma felt hot tears on her cheeks and was startled by them. When had she started crying? And then Dalton's heart stopped, Morrison continued, and you realized that safety isn't the same as living. That sometimes the risk of speaking is worth taking, even if it means exposing yourself to pain. I don't know how to do this, Emma admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know how to be vulnerable and still do my job. I don't know how to care about people and not be destroyed when I can't save them. Nobody knows that, Morrison said. We just do it anyway. We care, and we fight, and sometimes we lose, and it tears us apart. But we keep going because the alternative is worse. The alternative is becoming so isolated that we forget why we're fighting in the first place. Emma wiped her eyes roughly. Chun thinks I'm using Dalton as some kind of redemption. Are you? I don't know, maybe. Emma looked up at the stars, so bright in the Afghan sky. But he asked me to keep talking. And I think I owe him that much. You don't owe him anything, Morrison said. But if talking helps you heal, then do it for yourself. Not because you owe someone, but because you deserve to be whole again. They walked in silence for a while longer, and Emma found herself grateful for Morrison's presence, for his willingness to listen without trying to fix her. When they finally headed back toward the barracks, Emma said something she'd been thinking since the moment Dalton's heart had restarted. I'm terrified. Morrison glanced at her. Of what? Of caring again. Of letting people in. Finding out that the silence was the only thing holding me together, and now I'm going to completely fall apart. Then we'll put you back together, Morrison said simply. That's what teams do. Emma wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that speaking again wouldn't destroy her. That vulnerability wasn't the same as weakness. That she could care about her team without being crushed by the weight of responsibility. But belief was harder than silence ever was, and the real test was still 2 weeks away. When Commander Vincent Dalton returned to FOB Atlas N, she'd have to face the man whose life she'd saved, and who might have inadvertently saved hers in return. Psychological evaluation took place in a cramped office that smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Captain Lewis Hartman, the base psychologist, was a thin man in his 40s with tired eyes that suggested he'd heard every possible variation of trauma a war zone could produce. Staff Sergeant Reeves, he began, settling into his chair with a thick file that Emma recognized as her service record. I appreciate you coming in voluntarily. Major Chun didn't give me much choice, Emma said, then immediately regretted the defensive tone. Hartman smiled slightly. Fair enough. Let's start simple. How are you sleeping? Fine, that was quick. Most people at least pretend to think about it. He made a note. Nightmares? Emma hesitated. Sometimes about Mosul. Among other things. Hartman leaned back, studying her with an intensity that made Emma want to look away. You know, I've been on this base for 8 months. I've heard about you the entire time. The medic who never speaks. Some people said you were a ghost. Others said you were the most dedicated medical professional they'd ever seen. A few suggested you were dangerous. Dangerous how? Someone who's that disconnected from human interaction while working in life or death situations. It raised flags. He flipped through the file. But your outcomes were impeccable. Not a single preventable death under your care. Response times that set base records. You were a medical machine. I did my job. You did it exceptionally well. But here's what interests me. You broke your silence to save Commander Dalton. Not to protect yourself from administrative action. Not to ask for help. Not even to connect with your team. You spoke because you thought it would help someone else survive. Emma said nothing, unsure where this was leading. That tells me your silence was never about inability to communicate. It was about control. About protecting yourself from the vulnerability that comes with connection. Hartman leaned forward. So my question isn't why you stopped speaking. My question is, what made Vincent Dalton worth the risk? The question caught Emma off guard. She'd expected clinical interrogation about symptoms and coping mechanisms, not philosophical inquiry into her motivations. He was dying, she said simply. So were other people during your 3 years of silence. You saved them without speaking. He was different. How? Emma struggled to articulate something she barely understood herself. He never tried to fix me. Everyone else, they either wanted to solve the problem or gave up trying. But Dalton just accepted it. He trusted me to do my job and never made my silence into something I had to defend or explain. And that made you feel safe enough to be vulnerable with him. I wasn't trying to be vulnerable. I was trying to save his life. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Hartman set down his pen. Emma, I'm going to be direct with you. You're not unstable. You're not broken. You're someone who experienced moral injury, the pain of being unable to prevent suffering despite doing everything right. And your response was to eliminate one vector of pain, emotional connection through speech. That's not. It is exactly that. And it worked for a while. But the problem with cutting yourself off from vulnerability is that you also cut yourself off from healing, from connection, from the things that make us human rather than just functional. Emma felt her jaw tighten. So what's your professional recommendation, Captain? That I talk more? Feel more? Risk getting destroyed again? My recommendation is that you stop treating your emotions like enemy combatants. Hartman's voice was gentle but firm. You can't win a war against yourself, Emma. You'll just keep fighting until there's nothing left. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She'd been at war with herself for 3 years, fighting against grief, against connection, against the terrifying possibility that she might care about someone and fail them again. I'm clearing you for duty, Hartman continued. But I'm also mandating weekly sessions. Not because I think you're unstable, but because you're in transition. You're relearning how to be human after 3 years of being a medical machine. That's hard work, and you shouldn't do it alone. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. One more thing, Hartman said as she stood to leave. Commander Dalton called me yesterday. From Landstuhl. Emma froze. Why? To tell me that if I even considered pulling you from duty, he'd personally file complaints up the chain until someone listened. He said you were the finest combat medic he'd ever worked with, and that your speaking or not speaking had zero bearing on your ability to save lives. Hartman smiled. He was quite emphatic about it. Despite everything, Emma felt warmth spread through her chest. He shouldn't have done that. Probably not. But he did anyway. Because he cares about you. And from what I can tell, that's not something that happens often in your life. Hartman opened the door. Maybe it's time to let it. Emma left the office feeling more unsettled than when she'd arrived. Hartman hadn't condemned her or labeled her broken, which was somehow worse. He'd held up a mirror and forced her to look at patterns she'd been avoiding for 3 years. She found Marcus in the team room, cleaning his weapon with the kind of methodical focus that suggested he was avoiding his own thoughts. How'd it go? He asked without looking up. He thinks I'm at war with myself. Are you? Emma sat down across from him. Apparently. Marcus finally looked up, his expression serious. For what it's worth, I don't think you're broken. I think you're someone who cared too much and got hurt, so you found a way to care less. But Emma, we need people who care too much. Especially out here. Caring too much is how people get killed. No, not caring enough is how people get killed. Caring too much is how heroes get made. He reassembled his weapon with practiced efficiency. You know how many medics I've worked with who treat casualties like problems to solve. Who goes through the motions but never actually connect with the people they're saving. Emma shook her head. Most of them. Because it's easier that way. Safer. But you? Marcus set down his rifle. Even when you weren't speaking, you cared. I could see it in how you treated people. The extra minute you'd spend making sure someone was comfortable. The way you'd check on guys days after treating them. You cared, even when you were trying not to. That sounds like a weakness. It's your greatest strength. And Dalton saw it, even when you were hiding it from yourself. Before Emma could respond, alarms blared across the base. The emergency tones that meant incoming casualties. Both of them were moving before the announcement. Crackled over the speakers. Mass casualty event. Convoy hit by IED. Multiple urgent surgical. All medical personnel report immediately. Emma's training took over, the familiar calm settling over her as she sprinted toward the aid station. Major Chun was already there, coordinating with the surgical team. The organized chaos of trauma response filled the space supplies being staged, blood products being prepped, teams assembling. "Reeves," Chun called out. "You're with me on the primary trauma bay. We've got 4 urgent surgical coming in hot." The helicopters arrived minutes later, and Emma's world narrowed to blood and anatomy and the desperate fight to keep tissue perfused and airways patent. The first casualty had a femoral bleed that painted everything red. Emma's hands moved automatically, pressure, tourniquet, fluid resuscitation, while Chun worked to stabilize the chest trauma. "Talk to me, Reeves," Chun barked. "Status?" "Bleeding controlled, pressure dropping, he needs blood now," Emma rattled off, her voice clear and clinical. No hesitation. No silence. The young soldier on the table couldn't have been more than 19. Grabbed Emma's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were wide with terror. "Am I gonna die?" He gasped. 3 years ago, Emma would have said nothing. Would have let her actions speak. Would have avoided the promise that might become a lie. But 3 years ago, she hadn't spoken to a dying man and watched him fight his way back to life. "Not on my watch," Emma said firmly, meeting his eyes. "But I need you to stay with me. Can you do that?" The soldier nodded, and Emma saw his fear transform into determination. Sometimes people needed words to fight for. Sometimes promises weren't poison, they were lifelines. "Good, now conserve your energy and let us work." For the next 6 hours, Emma moved between casualties in a controlled frenzy of emergency medicine. She spoke constantly, now coordinating with Chun, updating other providers, reassuring patients. Her voice became another tool in her arsenal, and she wielded it with the same precision she used for everything else. When the last patient was stabilized and headed to surgery, Emma found herself standing in the blood-spattered aid station, hands shaking with post-adrenaline tremors. "You did good work today," Chun said, appearing beside her with 2 bottles of water. "Really good." "We saved them all," Emma said, almost disbelieving. "We did. Thanks in large part to your coordination and communication." Chun handed her the water. "This is what I needed to see. Not that you could speak, but that you could function while speaking. That the silence wasn't the only thing holding you together." Emma drank deeply, trying to process the shift. She'd been terrified that speaking would break her concentration, would make her vulnerable in the middle of life or death situations. But instead, it had made her more effective, more connected, more human. "That kid," Emma said. "The one who asked if he was going to die. I promised him he wouldn't. What if I'd been wrong? Then you'd have given him hope to fight with, which is sometimes the difference between survival and giving up." Chun's expression softened. "Emma, you can't control outcomes. You can only control your effort and your heart. Today you gave both, and everyone lived because of it." That night, Emma sat in her quarters writing an email she'd been avoiding for 3 years. The words came slowly at first, then faster as the dam broke completely. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Hassan, you don't know me, but 3 years ago, I tried to save your daughter's life. I failed. I've carried that failure with me every day since, and it made me stop speaking for reasons I'm still learning to understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that Amira mattered, that her death changed me, that I've spent 3 years becoming a better medic because I couldn't save her, and maybe that means something, even if it doesn't bring her back. Today I saved 4 lives and I spoke to them. I made promises I wasn't sure I could keep, and they all survived. I think Amira would have wanted that. I hope she will. I'm sorry I couldn't save her, but I promise I'll keep saving others in her memory. For as long as I'm able." Staff Sergeant Emma Reeves, she hit send before she could second-guess herself, then lay back on her bunk. Exhausted and raw, and somehow lighter than she'd felt in 3 years. Commander Dalton was coming back in 10 days. And for the first time, Emma thought she might actually be ready to face him, not as the broken medic who'd saved his life, but as someone learning to be whole again. The C-130 carrying Commander Dalton touched down at FOB Atlas on a Tuesday morning under cloudless skies. Emma watched from a distance as the ramp lowered, telling herself she was there for medical reasons. In case he needed immediate evaluation. Professional courtesy. The truth was more complicated and far more terrifying. Marcus appeared beside her, arms crossed, a knowing smirk on his face. "You've been standing here for 20 minutes. I'm waiting to conduct a medical assessment." "Right, and I'm waiting because I enjoy the smell of jet fuel." Marcus nudged her shoulder. "It's okay to admit you're nervous. I'm not nervous. You're literally vibrating." Emma forced herself to still. Marcus was right, her entire body was tense, coiled like a spring. She'd saved Dalton's life, spoken for the first time in 3 years. And somehow that moment had created a connection. She didn't know how to navigate. Dalton emerged from the aircraft looking remarkably healthy for someone who'd been clinically dead 2 weeks ago. He moved with familiar confidence, though Emma's trained eye caught the slight favoring of his left side, and the carefully measured breathing that suggested his ribs were still healing. His eyes found her, almost immediately, and something in his expression made Emma's breath catch. "Welcome back, Commander," Marcus called out. Moving forward with the easy camaraderie of teammates who'd faced death together countless times, Dalton clasped his hand. But his attention remained fixed on Emma. "Webb, good to see you." Then louder, "Staff Sergeant Reeves, a word?" It wasn't a request. Emma followed him away from the landing zone, acutely aware of every curious glance from the personnel watching this interaction. The silent medic and the commander she'd brought back from the dead. It was the kind of story that fed base gossip for months. Dalton didn't speak until they were out of earshot, standing in the shadow of a supply depot. When he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable. "How are you?" he asked. The question was so unexpectedly gentle that Emma almost didn't know how to respond. "I should be asking you that. You're the one who was dead. And you're the one who broke 3 years of silence to save me. I'd argue that's more traumatic than a little cardiac arrest." Despite herself, Emma felt her lips twitch. A little cardiac arrest, hardly worth mentioning. Dalton's expression sobered. "Emma, I need you to understand something. What you did out there speaking to me, bringing me back, I don't take that lightly. I know what it cost you. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. But that's not why I wanted to talk." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The team has been sending updates. About you speaking during the mass CAS event. About your sessions with Hartman. About you functioning differently. Differently bad or differently good. Differently human." Dalton's voice was quiet. "And I need to know if you're doing this, the talking, the opening up, because you want to, or because you think it's what I need to see." The question hit deeper than Emma expected. Was she changing for herself or to prove something to the man whose life she'd saved? The line had become blurrier than she wanted to admit. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe both. Maybe neither. I'm still figuring it out." Dalton nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But Emma, if you're doing this because you feel guilty or obligated, I need you to stop. Right now." Your silence never bothered me. Your competence spoke louder than words ever could. It wasn't about you, Emma said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. When I spoke that day, it was because I needed to. Because staying silent in that moment would have been its own kind of lie. And yes, maybe that opened doors I'd kept locked for 3 years. But I'm the one who has to decide whether to walk through them. Something shifted in Dalton's expression, respect mixed with relief. Good, that's what I needed to hear. They stood in silence for a moment, and Emma realized it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Silence with Dalton felt different than the isolation she'd wrapped around herself for 3 years. This was companionable, shared. "The team wants to do something tonight," Dalton finally said. Informal gathering. Celebrate the fact that I'm still breathing. You should come. Every instinct told Emma to decline. To return to her quarters, to maintain distance, to protect herself from the vulnerability of social connection. But another part of her, the part that had spoken to save Dalton, that had promised a dying soldier he'd survive, that had written a letter to Amira's parents, that part said yes before her fear could stop her. Okay, Dalton's smile was genuine. Good, 1900 hours, rec building. Try not to overthink it. I overthink everything. I know. It's one of the things that makes you exceptional at your job and terrible at relaxing. He started to walk away, then paused. Emma, thank you. For everything. She watched him go, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or possibility. Or just the terrifying acknowledgement that she was starting to care about these people in ways that went beyond professional obligation. The gathering that evening was smaller than Emma expected. Just Dalton's immediate team. About 8 operators plus Major Chun, who'd apparently been invited as the senior medical officer. The rec building was unofficial territory, decorated with an odd mixture of military memorabilia and contraband. Items that technically weren't supposed to exist on base. Emma arrived exactly at 1900. Because being late felt even more anxiety-inducing than showing up at all. Marcus saw her first and immediately pressed a bottle of near beer into her hands. Before you ask, yes, it's non-alcoholic. Yes, it's still terrible. No, you're not allowed to leave for at least an hour. Those are very specific rules. You're a flight risk. We're taking precautions. Marcus guided her toward the group, where Lieutenant Morrison and several other operators were arguing about the best action movie of all time. It's Die Hard, Morrison was insisting. This isn't even a debate. Die Hard is a Christmas movie, countered Sergeant Kyle Fletcher, a demolitions expert with an impressive beard. Completely different category. A Christmas movie where he kills like 50 people still counts. Emma found herself listening to the banter with something close to amusement. She'd heard these conversations from a distance for 11 months, always separate, always apart. Being included felt strange and uncomfortable and surprisingly pleasant. Reeves! Fletcher called out. Settle this. Best action movie ever. Everyone turned to look at her, and Emma felt her throat tighten with the sudden attention. Old habits screamed at her to stay silent, to deflect, to retreat. The Princess Bride, she said instead. The room went silent for a beat, then erupted in laughter and protests. That's not an action movie. There's literally a sword fight on a cliff, and a giant and poison and a fire swamp. It's a romance. It's an action-adventure comedy romance, Emma said, her voice growing stronger. And it's better than Die Hard. Marcus was grinning like he'd won a bet. Even Dalton, sitting slightly apart with his healing ribs, looked pleased. The evening continued in that vain casual conversation, terrible jokes. Stories from deployments that were probably 70% exaggeration. Emma contributed sparingly at first, then more freely as the night wore on, and she realized no one was treating her like the broken medic or the miracle worker. They were just treating her like Emma. At one point, Morrison pulled her aside while the others were arguing about the logistics of a mission in Fallujah. This is good for you, he said quietly. Being here, being part of this, it's terrifying, Emma admitted. Most good things are. Morrison took a drink of his near beer, made a face. God, this stuff is awful. Anyway, I wanted to tell you the kid from the mass case event, the one you promised wouldn't die. He sent a message through his unit. Asked if you could visit him when he's out of surgery. Emma felt something warm bloom in her chest. He's doing okay? Better than okay. Surgeons say he'll make a full recovery. And he told everyone that the only reason he kept fighting was because you promised he'd survive. Morrison's expression was serious. That's what words can do, Emma. They can give people something to fight for. Before Emma could respond, the door burst open and Captain Hartman stuck his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but Reeves, you've got a visitor at the aid station. Says it's urgent. Emma's medical training kicked in immediately. She was moving toward the door before Hartman finished speaking, her mind already running through potential emergencies. Want me to come? Marcus asked, but Emma shook her head. I've got it. She jogged across the base to the aid station, where a young woman in civilian contractor attire was waiting. She looked Middle Eastern, perhaps in her late 20s, and her eyes were red from crying. Staff Sergeant Reeves? She asked in accented English. Yes, are you injured? No, I'm Layla Hassan. She paused, letting the name sink in. Amira was my younger sister. Emma felt the world tilt sideways. She'd sent that email 3 days ago, never really expecting a response, certainly never expecting this. How are you here? I'm a translator with a civilian contractor. When I got your email, I checked the deployment rosters and realized we were at the same base. Layla's voice shook. I had to come. I had to tell you in person. Emma braced herself for anger, for accusations, for the confirmation that her promises truly were poison. You didn't kill my sister, Layla said, tears streaming down her face. The people who fired those shots killed her. The war killed her. You tried to save her. And my father, her voice broke. He didn't mean what he said. He was destroyed by grief. He's regretted those words every day since. Emma's legs felt weak. I couldn't save her. No, but you honored her by becoming better. By saving others. Layla pulled out her phone, showing Emma a picture of a young girl with a bright smile and a purple flower in her hair. She would have wanted that. She wanted to be a doctor to help people. You did that for her. The tears Emma had been holding back for 3 years finally broke free. She didn't try to stop them, didn't try to maintain control. She just let herself feel the grief she'd been avoiding, the pain she'd tried to silence, the guilt she'd carried like a weight around her neck. Layla stepped forward and embraced her. And Emma found herself holding onto this stranger, who was somehow the key to everything. Thank you, Layla whispered. For remembering her. For speaking her name. For letting her matter. They stood like that for several minutes. 2 women connected by tragedy and healing and the complicated mathematics of survival. When Emma finally made it back to the rec building, the gathering was winding down. Dalton caught her eye immediately, taking in her red eyes and tear-stained face. You okay? He mouthed. Emma nodded. More than okay. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was going to be okay. She was learning to speak again. Learning to feel again. Learning that promises weren't always poison, and that vulnerability wasn't the same as weakness. And surrounded by these people, who'd accepted her silence and now accepted her words. Emma realized something profound. She'd saved Dalton's life 2 weeks ago, but in doing so, she'd also saved her own, 8 weeks after Commander Vincent Dalton's heart stopped in the Afghan desert. Emma Reeves found herself standing in front of 30 combat medics at Fort Bragg's Special Operations Medical Training Center. The classroom smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Nothing like the dust and diesel of Phobic less. My name is Staff Sergeant Emma Reeves, she began. Her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. Before we start today's training on advanced trauma management, I want to tell you a story about failure. The students shifted in their seats, surprised. Most instructors led with credentials and success stories. Emma had learned that honesty worked better. 3 years ago, I tried to save a 9-year-old girl's life in Iraq. Her name was Amira Hassan. I did everything right. Every protocol, every technique, every desperate measure. She died anyway, Emma paused, meeting the eyes of her students. And I stopped speaking for 3 years because of it. You could hear a pin drop in the classroom. I stopped speaking because I thought my words had failed her. Because I'd told her father I'd save her, and I couldn't keep that promise. I thought silence would protect me from ever making a promise I couldn't keep again. Emma walked between the rows of desks. What I learned is that silence doesn't protect anyone. It just creates a different kind of death. The death of connection, of humanity, of the very thing that makes us effective in this job. A young specialist in the front row raised her hand. What made you start speaking again? A SEAL commander's heart stopped during a mission. And I realized that staying silent in that moment would cost him his life. So I spoke. I told him to fight. And he did. Emma smiled slightly. Turns out words aren't useless after all. Sometimes they're the difference between giving up and holding on. She spent the next hour teaching them the technical aspects of cardiac arrest management. But woven throughout were lessons about communication, about staying human under pressure, about the balance between clinical detachment and genuine care. After class, Emma gathered her materials and headed outside, where the North Carolina autumn was painting the trees in shades of gold and red. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dalton. Lunch? Got news. They met at a small cafe off base, the kind of place where military personnel could blend in and pretend they were normal people with normal jobs. Dalton was already there, 2 coffees on the table, looking more relaxed than Emma had ever seen him during their time in Afghanistan. You look happy, Emma said, sliding into the booth across from him. I am. Got my full medical clearance today, no restrictions. I'm officially not a cardiac patient anymore. That's incredible. Emma felt genuine relief flood through her. There had been a small, persistent worry that Dalton's recovery wouldn't be complete, that the damage would be permanent. Cardiologists said my heart function is better than it was before the arrest. Something about the rapid intervention and quality of the resuscitation. Dalton's eyes sparkled. Apparently, I had an exceptional medic. You had a terrified medic who got lucky. No, I had a brave medic who refused to quit. He reached across the table, taking her hand. Emma, the doctor asked who performed my resuscitation. When I told him, he said he wanted to meet you. Said what you did, the timing, the technique, keeping me viable for 3.5 minutes. It's textbook perfect. He wants to use the case for teaching. Emma felt heat creep into her cheeks. It wasn't that extraordinary, it was to me. Dalton squeezed her hand gently. Speaking of which, I got orders. They're assigning me to the training command here permanently. I'll be developing a curriculum for advanced tactical training. So you're staying in North Carolina? If that's okay with you. Emma's heart did something complicated in her chest. Over the past 8 weeks, she and Dalton had been carefully building something between them: coffee dates, long walks, conversations that stretched into the early morning. Neither had pushed for definition or labels, both content to let it develop organically, but this felt like a shift, like a choice being made. It's more than okay, Emma said quietly. They ate lunch talking about mundane things, schedules, curriculum development, the terrible coffee in the training center break room. Normal conversation between 2 people who'd seen each other at their absolute worst and decided to stick around for the better. As they walked back to their cars, Dalton pulled something from his jacket pocket. I got something in the mail today. Thought you should see it. Emma unfolded the letter carefully. It was written in careful English, the handwriting shakier than Layla's, but unmistakably from the same family. Dear Commander Dalton, my daughter Layla told me about you, the man who nearly died and was saved by Staff Sergeant Reeves. She said you have helped Emma heal from what happened with my Amira. I wanted you to know that Emma has written to us, that she remembered my daughter's name, her favorite color, her dreams. For 3 years, I thought the woman who tried to save Amira had forgotten her, moved on, felt nothing. but Emma carried a mirror with her every day. She stopped speaking because my daughter's death hurt her so deeply. And she started speaking again to save your life. I am writing to ask you to tell Emma something. I wish I could tell her myself. She is forgiven. More than that, she is honored. Because of her, other families will not lose their children. Because of her pain, others will be spared the same suffering. Thank you for giving Emma a reason to speak again. Thank you for helping her heal. With respect, Karim Hassan. Emma's hands trembled holding the letter. She'd written to the Hassan family weeks ago, pouring out 3 years of guilt and grief. She hadn't expected a response. Certainly hadn't expected forgiveness. Emma? Dalton's voice was gentle. He forgives me, she whispered. After everything, he forgives me. Because there was never anything to forgive. You tried to save his daughter. You did everything right. Sometimes that's not enough, and that's not your fault. Emma folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her jacket. I've spent 3 years believing I failed her. That my promises were poison. That I had no right to speak because my words couldn't save her. And now? Now I think maybe I was wrong about all of it. Emma looked up at Dalton, tears streaming freely down her face. Maybe the point isn't that we can save everyone. Maybe it's that we keep trying anyway. That we keep speaking, keep connecting, keep caring even when it hurts. Dalton pulled her close, and Emma let herself be held in the middle of the parking lot, not caring who saw or what they thought. For 3 years, she'd believed vulnerability was weakness. Now she understood it was the only path to strength. That evening, Emma sat in her small apartment reviewing lesson plans for the next day's class. Her phone rang. Marcus calling from Afghanistan. Hey stranger, his familiar voice crackled through the connection. How's civilian life treating you? Hardly civilian. I'm still surrounded by military personnel and teaching combat medicine. Yeah, but you get to sleep in a real bed and eat food that doesn't taste like cardboard. That's basically retirement. Marcus paused. Seriously though, how are you doing? Good, really good actually. Emma realized she meant it. The teaching is challenging but rewarding. The students remind me why this job matters. And Dalton? Emma smiled. He's good too, that's it? He's good too. Come on Reeves, give me something. The team has bets running on when you two make it official. Tell the team to mind their own business, so that's a yes. Marcus laughed. I'm happy for you, Emma. You deserve this. Both of you do. After they hung up, Emma found herself thinking about the team still deployed, still facing the same dangers she'd left behind. Part of her felt guilty for being safe while they remained in harm's way. But another part understood that her contribution had simply shifted, instead of saving lives directly. She was training others to do the same. The next morning, Emma arrived early to set up the training bay for the day's practical exercises. She was arranging equipment when one of her students, Specialist Rodriguez, appeared in the doorway. Sergeant Reeves? Can I ask you something? Of course. Rodriguez hesitated, clearly struggling with something. Yesterday, when you talked about stopping speaking for 3 years, how did you know it was time to start again? How did you know you were ready? Emma studied the young medic. She couldn't have been more than 22, with earnest eyes that suggested she was carrying her own weight. I didn't know I was ready, Emma said honestly. I spoke because someone needed me to, and staying silent would have cost him his life. Sometimes readiness isn't something we feel, it's something we choose. What if I choose wrong? What if I speak up and I'm wrong, and someone gets hurt because of it? Emma recognized this fear. She'd lived it for 3 years. Rodriguez, what happened? What are you really asking me? The story came out in a Russia training exercise where Rodriguez had seen something concerning a patient, but hadn't spoken up because she wasn't sure. The patient had been fine, but the uncertainty was eating at her. You're afraid that if you speak and you're wrong, it'll undermine your credibility, Emma said. That people won't trust you. Yes, here's what I learned. Staying silent when you see something doesn't protect you or anyone else. It just means that if something goes wrong, you'll carry that weight forever. Emma moved closer. In this job, we have to speak up. Even when we're uncertain. Even when we might be wrong. Because the cost of silence is always higher than the cost of being corrected. Rodriguez nodded slowly, absorbing this. Thank you, Sergeant. After she left, Emma stood alone in the training bay, thinking about how far she'd come. From the broken medic who couldn't speak to the instructor teaching others to find their voices. The transformation still felt surreal sometimes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dalton. Dinner tonight? Want to talk about something important? Emma's stomach fluttered nervously, but she typed back, Sure. Your place or mine? Mine. I'll cook that evening. Emma arrived at Dalton's apartment to find him actually cooking pasta with what smelled like homemade sauce. He looked domestic and comfortable, a far cry from the tactical operator she'd known in Afghanistan. This is impressive, Emma said, accepting the glass of wine he offered. Don't be too impressed until you taste it. Dalton stirred the sauce, not quite meeting her eyes. I wanted to talk to you about something, and I figured feeding you first would soften the blow if you react badly. That's ominous. It's not bad. At least I don't think it is. Dalton finally turned to face her. Emma, we've been doing this dance for 2 months now. Coffee dates, careful conversations, both of us pretending we don't know exactly what this is. Emma's heart hammered. And what is this? It's me falling in love with the woman who saved my life and then saved her own. It's you learning to be vulnerable with someone who sees all your scars and doesn't need you to hide them. Dalton stepped closer. It's 2 broken people who got a second chance and don't want to waste it. Emma felt tears threatening but didn't try to hide them. I'm terrified. Of me? Of this. Of caring about you and something happening. Of building something and losing it. She took a shaky breath. Vincent, you died in my hands. Your heart stopped and I brought you back. But I know how fragile it all is. How quickly everything can disappear. I know. I was the one who died, remember? Dalton took her hands. Emma, life is fragile. Connection is risky. Love is terrifying. But the alternative, going through life protecting ourselves from pain, that's not living. That's just existing. You sound like Captain Hartman. He's a smart guy. Dalton smiled. Look, I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now. I'm just asking you to admit what we both know is true. That this matters. That we matter to each other. Emma looked at this man who'd accepted her silence, celebrated her voice, and walked beside her while she learned to be whole again. And she realized that love didn't have to be terrifying. It could also be coming home. I love you, she said, the words falling out before fear could stop them. And yes, I'm terrified. But I'm doing it anyway. Dalton kissed her then, gentle and certain, and Emma let herself feel it fully. The fear was still there, hovering at the edges. But so was something else, hope, joy, the possibility of building something that lasted. They ate dinner talking about the future assignments they might pursue together. Where they'd live long term, whether Emma would ever stop overthinking everything. Probably not, Emma admitted. Overthinking is kind of my signature move. I know. It's one of the things I love about you. Later, as Emma was leaving, Dalton stopped her at the door. Hey, thank you. For what? For speaking that day in the desert. For fighting for me. For teaching me that vulnerability isn't weakness. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. For showing me what courage really looks like. Emma drove home through the quiet streets, Karim Hassan's letter in her pocket, and Dalton's words echoing in her mind. She thought about Amira, the 9-year-old girl whose death had silenced her. About the 3 years she'd spent trying to protect herself from pain by cutting herself off from connection. And she thought about Commander Vincent Dalton. whose heart had stopped and restarted, giving both of them a second chance at living. The silent medic had found her voice, and in finding it, she'd discovered something far more important. She'd found herself. 3 years of silence. 6 weeks of transformation. 2 months of healing. And finally, beautifully, terrifyingly, perfectly, she'd found her way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.